Being a graduate student at the U of A, in one sentence, to me, is living on the edge.
I find being a graduate student is both incredibly exciting and also quite challenging. On one hand, I have the privilege of time and space to ask complex research questions in deep and meaningful ways, while on the other, I often feel overwhelmed moving between my various roles on campus as an instructor, a student, a researcher, a friend, and a family member. And the material conditions of the university don't make it easy for graduate students to live a holistic life.
I arrived just a few days before I started my grad school journey. It was my first time outside of Africa.
I think one of the huge stressors is this overall culture of struggling. This culture of struggling normalizes struggle, which the mental health advocate in me sees as a red flag.
I think the expectations we often put on ourselves is a lot higher than what we expect from others. And it's a lot easier for us to tell others to take care of themselves without even checking in on ourselves to make sure that we're doing okay. And why do we do this? I think it might even just be the university environment. If you think about it, it's a very competitive environment. It's, we're under the pressure of not really knowing what's in the future for us in terms of a job, in terms of going to grad school or getting into the next program that we want to be in. There's so many different things that are dependent on us being well and not being vulnerable and not, showing any kind of weakness.
Poor supervisory relationship is a really big stressor for a graduate student, because if you think they really rely on that one person for mentorship through the program, for identifying career prospects, for academic references, for scholarships, for references for jobs later on. So if that relationship is not a good relationship, it's very distressing.
I felt quite isolated in my lab, so I didn't really talk to the other grad students all that often. So in our cohort of 80, we might see each other once a week, twice a week.
I think oftentimes, because isolation is such a common theme amongst graduate students, we have to really focus on community building or rebuilding.
You are kind of shoving what feels like 4 years of coursework and readings into 2 years, actually into 1 year. So we're reading like hundreds and hundreds of pages a day, and we're asked to reflect on it and write on it and put it into our research, and we're asked to create something new in our field, and it's definitely a lot of pressure.
Speaking from my own experience, but also from like people I know and even like academic research and things like that, I think one of the biggest challenges is that the institutional setting of a university isn't necessarily welcoming to Indigenous people. There's a lot of systems that are foreign or historically have meant to create barriers, and now they kind of, universities are trying to amend their practices, but it's happening still in a very typically colonial framework. So a lot of kids, adults, people that want to engage with the institution struggle to do so.
First People's House exists on campus. First People's House has been on campus for over 40 years. It's there to serve students in a very holistic way.
As I see it in the landscape of the University of Alberta for Indigenous graduate students, something that's happening right now but doesn't fully exist is an Indigenous graduate student community, right? And so the Indigenous Graduate Students Association has recently formed. They're doing a lot of work to create community, to increase their membership, to get feedback from that community. But the nature of this university is that departmentally and faculties are quite siloed here, right? And so making those connections across to other Indigenous graduate students is, I think, one of the biggest gaps in the Indigenous graduate student experience here. I'm the second Indigenous MFA in 25 years in the program, and so it's a steep learning curve for the department as well as myself. So I thought it was very important to ground myself outside of my field to make sure that I could function within my field. which I think speaks back to that sort of dual proficiency thing I was alluding to earlier, which is, as an Indigenous student, I have to first ground myself in Indigenous knowledge to be able to go then work in my field. So I, in some ways, have to have a degree and a half every time I do something.
Some of the things that I use for stress and mental health on campus, definitely taking advantage of the fitness facilities, knowing that exercise helps your mental health, just trying to take a break and go for even a 15-minute run or something like that.
I think mental well-being just goes in with your cognitive state of mind and how you feel and your emotion. And so really it comes down to you being able to thrive in your environment, not just physically feeling well, but like that you're happy and that you're thriving and you're joyful.
Just go slow when it gets that close to your fingers.
Converse and Cook, our mission really has been to empower people to explore their identity and connection to community through food. A lot of our participants would talk about feeling lonely, but when we're able to talk to others and create environments where we can support each other and talk about it, then all of a sudden that loneliness goes away.
We have recently been in discussion with faculties about establishing a minimum funding level for Ph.D. students to give them some security while they're here as graduate students. We provide services around career prospects. That's another very big worry for graduate students. So students are required to identify what we would consider alternative career prospects, meaning careers that are not in academia.
The stigma, this culture around mental health, the way we talk about it, the way we represent it in our media, the way we use like everyday language about mental health, it still maintains this humongous barrier that stops a lot of young people from getting the help that they need.
There's often a fear of perhaps the repercussions of admitting that they're having difficulty will have on their supervisor's willingness to work with them, on their ability to get awards and scholarships, on their career prospects later on.
I understand especially that academics are under their own kind of pressure as well. So I guess that's another one, to model good behavior in terms of being an academic, a successful academic, and practicing self-care, because it is a lot and it's easy to get caught up in all of that.
Sometimes we forget to include like, I really care about you, you're really important to me, and that's why I would like you to maybe access these resources for your sake, because I don't want to see you suffering or struggling anymore.
I come from a culture where you have to greet people when you see them on the street. And being here, people don't do that. It can make a person feel very isolated. Talk to people, say hi. At the beginning of the year, if you see a new student, stop to say hello and ask them how they're doing.
I think a lot of times, in academia, we talk about our degrees and what we study first, but we are so much more than just what we study and what we research. And so being able to meet people in that new light has really helped me grow and just help my mental wellness.
Graduate students live on the edge. We live with precarity, we live with uncertainty. But when we reach out to each other, when we connect, when we ask each other what really matters to us, we can come together and make a meaningful difference to denaturalize the stigma around mental health on campus.